We are so honored yet again to have Robert Bob Wong here speaking about a very interesting sort of topic about America's first foreign war. So just to give you a little background, his resume/bio is impressive. I'm just going to give you some highlights. He is a former U.S. diplomat of 25 years. He's worked in many countries, including Liberia, Bangladesh, Bosnia, Sudan, Nigeria, Iraq, Yemen, and so on. So many impressive countries under his belt. So as a Foreign Service officer, he serves in a number of roles, but chiefly as a political advisor to the ambassador. He's been recognized for his achievements in supporting recovering war-torn countries such as Bosnia, Iraq, Liberia, demining efforts and removing explosive remnants of war programs in Sudan, and in supporting anti-corruption efforts in Nigeria. He's a master's of public administration from Rockefeller College, the University of Albany, and a master's in military operational science from the Air Force Command and Staff College. So as you can see, he's a really interesting guy with a lot of great information pass on. So I think that was all I was going to say. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you.
And enjoy.
Thank you, sir. Hope it sounds okay. Okay? This talk is much like a talk I would give or a presentation I would provide to people who visit embassies. So the idea is to give people just enough of the host country's history so they have an idea of what they're dealing with when they go out into that country and meet their leaders. So the idea is you want to set people up for understanding what they're seeing and who they're going to be talking to. This is very important because what we do in diplomacy is we shape things. In this case, I'm sort of shaping you so you'll understand how the battle evolved with our first foreign war. And it's akin to what we call shaping the battle space. It's just to give you an idea. The key part of what we do in the State Department, in fact, what we do at the government level, and we miss this sometimes, is we take policy, which is politically driven, and put it into action. And so you'll see through this talk, it's mostly history, but it's about how those policy ideas are transformed into action. And the action will be the first American foreign war, where Americans go out of the continental United States into a foreign land and do what they were supposed to do, their idea. Within this, one of the key parts, there's 3 parts, is going to be a domestic understanding where citizens like yourself understand what you're trying to achieve and the military ability to carry out that by force, and also the international diplomatic means, because overseas, in other countries, you're dealing with sovereign countries, sovereign leaders, who are the equal with the United States. They are, in their mind, as big and as strong as we are, or at least should be treated as such. So keep this in mind, those 3 parts. Okay. We'll start off with just what happened to get to where we're going to go. And you'll see we're going to be talking about America's first war. So we need to understand the mindset of the people who led us into that war. And we're going to start really early, because we're going to start with before there was a United States. This has to do with 1763. There is no United States. There is barely a bunch of colonies. And the French and Indian War, that's what we call it. The British call it something else. The French call it something else. But at the end of that war, 1763, basically the French were removed from the North American continent, at least in the New York area. Just keep that in mind. Leaving, for the most part, only Spain as a foreign power in the continental United States, except for Britain, of course. Now, this is important because, first of all, the British fought this war at the behest of Americans, of us, and it was very costly. And so what they did was they asked the colonists to pay for it, and they put in a bunch of taxes, which you remember from your history, and they also put in some conditions. Now, I won't go into too much detail. The most important, you'll see here, this is Florida. It's Spanish-speaking Florida. Okay, so you can see that the colonies are basically English-speaking. But for the Americans, for the colonists, one of the most oppressive things was you could not travel west of the Appalachian Mountains. That was reserved for Native Americans. And for people who are now in Tennessee and Kentucky, they're saying, wait a minute, we're already here. People in the Ohio Valley were basically saying, we're already here. You mean we can't go there? That's number one. The second was sugar tax, a sugar tax. Americans basically made rum, and they sold it. And they couldn't get that rum, that sugar, cheaply from the Indies anymore. They also, you'll see, later on there'll be a Stamp Act, which you remember from your history, where all documents had to be approved by the Crown, and you had to pay a stamp tax. So these conditions, right after the end of the French and Indian War, they call them intolerable acts. The worst one, and leads us directly to the next part, which was would call the Navigation Act. Basically, it made all colonists were not able to use their own ships if they were going to trade outside of the United States. They had to use British ships, and they could not trade with other countries, such as France. And you'll see the colonies said, this is terrible. We depend upon trade to make money. And you're saying we can't use our own ships to go to England and sell things? So the Americans resisted. So much so, and this is a woodcut, but in 1772, they burnt a British ship in basically, trying to remember in Providence, Rhode Island. That's the one. So they took radical action because they didn't like all these acts. It wasn't so much the acts were intolerable, it's just that they came without us, which they considered themselves British. The Parliament just passed these acts and proclaimed them. And they said, well, it's like taxation. No taxation or no representation. You can't tax us. Now this is some text, but the point, this goes back to some of the lessons that were learned, is that trade has always been an important part of the American ethos. That's what our shipping has done. And the most important part was we wanted to trade, and these restrictions, whether it was rum, whether it was timber, these restrictions, many people resented. Okay, let's get to the main part. The United States, and actually all European countries, since a long time, since 1492, have always been victims of, we call them corsairs, some people call them pirates, but these are people who on boats would capture other boats and take prisoners and seize the cargo. And these people came from the north of Africa, and we have 4 of them here. We have Morocco, what we call Algiers now, Tunis, and Tripoli. That was called the Barbary Coast. And we call it the Barbary Coast because Berbers were people who were native to north of Africa. So they're Berbers, we call them Berbers or Berberies, and so that's how the name is. So this talk is about the United States war, we'll get into what war really is, in the Barbary Coast, which is the north of Africa. So the question you should be asking is, why are we having our first war in Africa? And the basis for that is because we're trying to defend our commercial interests and our citizens. As I said, since 1492, there's been a lot of the Barbary, we'll call them pirates, privateers, corsairs, have always been attacking merchantmen who could not defend themselves. In this example, this woodcut, in 1796, they took some American seamen, and John Adams, who you know, and Thomas Jefferson were asked to negotiate for their release. And the Europeans have been facing these corsairs for a long time, and have had, the Pope would intervene, other countries that have diplomats specifically tasked with the idea of negotiating the release of their merchantmen. The United States, and I'm jumping a little bit, 1796, this is after we had the war, the Revolutionary War, we had to assign special people. And they were Adams and Jefferson in this case. And they would ask of these Barbary pirates, corsairs, why are you doing this? We have no problem with you, we're a brand new nation. And part of it is, they would say that their right is under their religion. If you're not a follower of the prophet, therefore you are our enemy, therefore we can wage war with you, which means we can seize your cargo and we can seize your people and hold them for ransom. One justification. This is important because Thomas Jefferson realized what they had said and said, we can never negotiate with people who believe in such a thing. And up until that point, he believed he could. And this thought that we could never negotiate, we can only use force, becomes a guiding principle for him as he becomes president, because in 1796, he wasn't president yet. Okay. So, what did both Europe and the Americas, when you negotiate, you would have to pay a ransom. And some people simply called it tribute, which was basically a financial payment to the leaders of those four Barbary entities. And this is a congressman, and his quote is, "Millions for defense, not 1 cent for tribute." So he's a hardliner. He says, we're not going to pay for this ransom, we'll rather go out and defend ourselves. Easier said than done. This is just a timeline. I'm getting a little ahead, but I'm trying to give people an idea that this took a long time because things just don't go as quickly as people they want. So let's assume in the United States, we basically had the Battle of Yorktown in 1781. We won. The Treaty of Paris, which formally ended the Revolutionary War, happened in 1783. As soon as that peace was declared, the British said, okay, you guys are all by yourself, you defend your ships. And that's what we had to do. Except right after the end of the Revolutionary War, we do what a lot of countries do after a war, is you don't spend money on defense. And so we disbanded our army in 1783, disbanded our navy, and in 1785, we sold the last of the Continental Navy. And we'll get into this because this opened up the entire floodgates, because the Barbary pirates said, the British aren't going to protect you, the French aren't going to protect you, and so for the first time, we're going to go after American shipping, because you have no navy. The other places, Italy, Sicily, they have a navy. They can defend themselves. This is a picture, and I'm getting a little bit ahead, but we did send some warships later on, and we'll get into that in a minute, but the problem is we didn't know those waters, because it's not the United States, it's Africa, it's the Mediterranean. We never operated there. This is some of the timeline that for comparison purposes, and it mentions here, if I can see if I use this new pointer, this right here, 1794, and Washington was elected in 1789. Okay, so remember we had the Articles of Confederation. That was our first form of government. So actually from 1776 until 1789, we were operating under the Articles of Confederation. Under the Articles, we had no revenue for a national government. We had no national government. We had Congress, which was represented by states. And each one of the states, if you wanted to do something like a war, even the Revolutionary War, you had to ask each state to come up with the money. There was no federal government. And the point here is that we realized that you needed something better. And this is where the Constitution comes in. Because in 1789, the Constitution takes effect. And it called for a strong federal government, the ability to raise its own taxes, and its own army and navy, were they to decide that's necessary. But that's the most important part for this. And you can see the war clouds are coming because it's 1789, and our sailors have been, and ships have been taken every single year since then. And so people were getting fed up, and people were dying because they were not able to defend themselves in their commercial interests. 1794, a few years after the Constitution, we put in the Naval Act, 1794, because we had no Navy, and so we commissioned 6 ships, and you can read it there, and we started building them, and it took, remember this is during Washington, who served 8 years, 2 terms, and went into John Adams, who served 1 term, 4 years, and there were hardly any ships. It took until maybe 1800 for the ships to come and be built. And then you had to man them, and you had to train people for them. So cost overruns, construction delays is nothing new. Probably the most interesting thing, which is a continuation, is they didn't build it all in one shipyard. They built the ships in 6 shipyards. And the reason was quite clear, is now you had 6 ships in maybe 6 different states, or at least 6 different cities, and they all got their military gun contracts. So things have not changed at all. Now, we're talking a little bit about the domestic issue. So you're seeing the start of domestic necessity. And we're starting to see the rise of a military capability, because the domestic part is, our seamen, our sailors are being captured by foreign people, and we need to go out and do something far away from us, so we need a military means to force them to do that. At the same time, we are talking to each of the four Barbary pirate states. However, it's not always as clear as you want, nor is it productive. Okay. This is just maybe a side note. Okay. This is it's actually called a Union Jack, but it's a jack. When a military ship goes into a foreign harbor, on the front of the ship, they will raise an ensign, a jack, or a different flag. That's to say, we are a military ship. One reason why you do that is if you're a military ship and you're operating in peacetime, you pay no port taxes. And so, we're waiting now for our first military ship to present itself to a foreign port. We've been doing this for a while, not necessarily with this jack. Actually, the number of stars would be different back then, it would be 15. But in 1777, Morocco, during the war, Revolutionary War, they told their port people, the United States, or the continental United States, all their ships shall be treated as any other foreign ships, including military ships. And so that was the first time a foreign state had recognized the United States, which even before they were the United States, it was the first time they were recognized as an independent entity. And that friendship between Morocco and the United States is the oldest continuous relationship of any country. 1789, this is Federal Hall, the Constitution. It is said that George Washington took his oath of office in front of this hall. The hall is no longer there, it's been rebuilt. Okay. Now we're getting to the bad guy. This is Pasha Yusuf Karamanli of Tripoli. And you know, of course, what the war we're talking about is the shores of Tripoli, the United States Marines. But this is the bad guy. The Barbary states were 4 states, well, except for Morocco, 3 states. There were 3 states that were basically Ottoman-run. The Ottoman Empire didn't really control these places, so they had strongmen who seized power or took power because they had armed men with them. And so we'll call him Yusuf. He did sign a treaty back in '96 with the United States, permitting U.S. ships with payment to come into the port. And this was a normal arrangement. However, he, even though he wrote this treaty himself and gave it to the United States and we ratified it, he changed his mind. He wanted more money. He actually, at this time, the United States, in 1789, the United States budget was about, let's say, $668,000. It was less than $1 million. So for us to pay $40,000 in Spanish dollars was a lot of money. In fact, in some cases, these ransoms, these tributes were equivalent to 20% of the United States budget. In the following years, after 1789, it would go to $1 million. Even so, it's a lot of money. Here we get to the plot of thickening. Here is 1800, and after Jefferson is elected president. And he's always been not a hawk, but we'll call him that. He subscribes to the theory that you cannot negotiate with those people because they have their own way of looking at things. Let's just talk a little bit about military capability. What made the Corsairs, or the Barbary pirates, so effective against even the Europeans is that they used light, small ships operating in waters that they knew well. And they had guns in their ports, modern cannon for the times. But they would be able to outmaneuver the larger European ships and then run to the safety of their ports. Let me just to give you an idea, here is a normal modern ship of the line back then in the lower right hand. And up here would be, just point here, would be these type of ships. So you can see these are the relative sizes. So they were not as big, but they were certainly more effective. This was, in 1800, the United States did send some warships. And this is more of a not a good news story. In that, in 1800, the United States did send the United States George Washington. It was a converted merchantman. It wasn't a regular ship of the line. And it goes to a port, and they were watched over by the ship's port, the enemy ship's port, and they were then forced to take down its American flag in 1800 and take the tribute all the way to Istanbul, Constantinople. And this was for the person who operated the ship, this was obviously humiliating experience. Here we have the USS Philadelphia. Again, it's named after the city which gave the ship to the new federal government. In this case, unfortunately, the ship ran aground and was captured by, remember, Yusuf Karamanli of the Pasha, and they wanted it. They were able to use, the Pasha was able to use the ship and refloat it and took the crew of the American sailors, who were military people, hostage. This happened this is the war we're talking about in 1804. So the United States wanted the ship back. So here we have a little bit of the episode, how they got the USS Philadelphia back. Actually, they burnt it. The United States Marines, who will eventually invade and put boots on the ground in Tripoli, took a small craft, and using Salvatore, who was an Arabic-speaking Sicilian, as the front man, they basically went alongside the Philadelphia. And their intent was to either retake the Philadelphia and attempt to get its crew back, and these are the U.S. Marines we're talking about. And then with that, well, Salvatore said, we want to come alongside the Philadelphia, which is no longer the Philadelphia, no longer controlled by the Americans. And so they know this guy. He's speaking Arabic. Must be okay. And so that's what happened. And then as soon as they saw that there were Marines on board, they said, Americanos, Americanos. And the Marines then had to basically quickly set the ship Philadelphia on fire. And then May 13th, the Marines went from the ship and then landed, and they attacked the city of Derna. They wanted to take the city. They were actually going to just try to find their other sailors who were on the Philadelphia. So this is a rescue mission. They're trying to find the sailors, who were about 300, and then bring them back home without having to pay a ransom. In this case, we have 80 Marines, and there are mercenaries with them. The mercenaries, both Arab and Greek, were under the command of another Karamanli. His name was, we'll call him Ahmed. He was the brother of Yusuf, the bad guy. Because basically, Yusuf took the title of Pasha from Ahmed. And Ahmed was in Egypt, and so on the way to this episode, the Marine said, Ahmed, you've been deposed unfairly. Come join us. And so he did. So the 400 mercenaries, Greek and Arabs, and 80 Marines marched across the desert and attacked the city of Derna. And it basically ends. It was a quick battle, took all of one morning. But the most important part was the aftermath. It was, shall we say, this is the other part of warfare. While the Marines, for the first time, were on a foreign shore to rescue their own kind, other military people from the USS Philadelphia, it's the aftermath that becomes important. So the rescue mission was partially successful. The United States agreed to withdraw from the city, which they had captured fairly, not to supply Ahmed's men anymore, and at this time the Pasha, Yusuf, the bad guy, agreed to release the wife and children of Ahmed, who they were holding actually in the city of Tripoli. And they also agreed to the U.S. agreed to pay $60,000 as ransom to get back the sailors from the USS Philadelphia. Was it a complete victory? No, but that's what we got. Okay, we're drawing towards an end. That was basically the conclusion of the First Barbary War, which means that there was a second one. And it will take some more time for that war to occur. In the meantime, piracy continued. Merchantmen from other cities other countries were also captured. It took until 1830 for this to stop, when Napoleonic France, under the First Republic, invaded Algeria and took Algeria for its own. And the Algerian French occupation or conquest of Algeria will continue until de Gaulle in the 1950s. What we have here is a picture of Jefferson's personal notes on the Barbary pirates' naval strength. So he was very, very involved in this war. And finally, this is a picture of the American legation in Tangiers, one of the Barbary pirates' towns. Actually, and this has been around since 1821. It shows you this is the first foreign property owned by the United States, and is still owned by the United States. And it basically shows the importance of the northern Mediterranean to the United States back then, and maybe not now, but it was certainly important then. finally, what does this all mean? Because I promised in the ad, what is all this military action, all this domestic requirements, our need to protect our commercial interests and protect our seamen, and also the diplomatic aspects of why do we want to talk to people about things? Why do we want to take military action? We have a policy. The United States has policies, and the idea is put them into action. And so sometimes these actions are not always followed through. And I just put up shipping containers here, because right now we're talking a lot about shipping around the world. One question is, why do we call them 20-foot shipping containers? And this is a metric world. Everyone around the world uses a metric system. And why are these are relatively, the 20-foot container is a relatively new thing. It's actually developed by an American in the 1960s. He basically is a Floridian. And he basically said, you're shipping a lot of stuff to Vietnam. You know, there's a lot of theft that happens. It would be a lot more convenient if we put everything into these things that I will have built. In fact, I'll even build a terminal to offload them in Cameron Bay, which you remember if you've been around for that long. And so, imagine, it's the cost, first of all, the cost is 1/20th of what they call break bulk shipping, because you just simply take the container, offload it, and you can even put it on a truck. 1/20th. And this convenience, this efficiency is an American idea, is now universal around the world. But the question is, why don't we own it? Why don't we control it better? Well, out of the top, it used to be out of the top 10 ports in the world, the United States was preeminent. And now we're like, maybe we control or operate maybe 2 out of those 10. Through companies, commercial companies. Well, let me stop there, because the purpose of this is really to just introduce you to a little part of history. Some people call the First Barbary War, in which it's the first time the American military has projected itself outside of the North America, South America area, went into the Mediterranean on U.S.-built ships, and put American troops, or American Marines, on a foreign purpose, on foreign ground, for the purpose of advancing protecting American commercial interests, trade, and American sailors and seamen. So, anyway, I just want to thank you for your attention, and we can open up for questions if you have any. Yes?
What is the difference between taxes and tariffs?
Well, okay. First of all, Congress, I don't remember the section, but Congress has the authority to levy taxes and tariffs. They're the only ones who have the ability to do that. Taxes are usually internal. Up until the Civil War and going into the 1940s, most of your federal revenue was from tariffs, because a ship would come in and they would render the tariffs as part of the right to offload things. This practice has been around since the Revolution. In fact, that's what when I showed you the picture of the Gaspé, their job was to intercept ships, which was burnt out. Their job is a British ship, and they're there to collect tariffs for the crown. And so their job was to identify ships coming in, saying, make sure, beyond your question, has to do with emergency authority given by Congress to the president for a specific purpose. And we'll see how that
turns out. Because it will become, in my assessment, it will become, and actually it's a constitutional issue, what can Congress delegate its constitutional authority to the executive? We'll see. But so the differences between taxes is the taxes are internal, tariffs are external.
And what is the emergency?
It was actually in the 1970s.
I mean,
don't,
today,
the,
because
well,
we have tariffs and.
I don't know the specific emergency, but it was an emergency that occurred in the past. And I think you'll start seeing some of the readings about it, or some of the newspaper reports in which the authority for the president to use those powers now is something that he needs closer reading. It was for a specific purpose. That's the best I can say right now. I wasn't. I'm not fully cognizant of what you're getting at, but I'm just explaining to you the basis.
We'll find out.
Anything else?
So what was the primary reason for the U.S.'s interest in having access to the Barbary Coast?
Barbary Coast?
Barbary Coast, especially when they were kind of busy with the quasi-American Corsair situation in the Atlantic and Caribbean. So why were they splitting their efforts in those regions?
Okay, the question is,
it trade or what were they seeking?
why were American ships in the Mediterranean?
Yeah, well, in the Barbary Coast.
Yeah.
Because that was the access point for.
Well, the Corsairs traveled throughout the Mediterranean. They actually had traveled throughout all of the Atlantic coast as well.
Right.
And if they saw a target of opportunity, they would take it. And unarmed merchantmen were easy targets. And so they would say, just like you see in the movies, or, Horatio Hornblower, stop your ship, otherwise we'll fire. They take the crews hostage, which is what they did. They take the men hostage, the women hostage, and this is a part that's actually in the Constitution. It's basically, you could seize the cargo, and if there was a war on, and you had the letters of, they call it marque and reprisal, you take that to a neutral port, and you sold the cargo, and you get your money. There has to be a war on. But the point is, the Corsairs operated throughout all the known world. The only thing that stopped them, or basically, you saw ships of the line, big ships that would come after them and fire their cannon and sink them. We're talking about implications for today. This is not unlike Captain Phillips and the Somalis, basically stealing ships or boarding them. This is not unlike the Houthis attacking, commercial ships in off the Bab el-Mandab in trying to get to the Suez Canal. It's not unlike that.
Maybe they got the idea from watching too much Pirates of the Caribbean.
This has been around forever. This has been around for a very long time, the idea of piracy. And the only way to stop it is to, in this case, the case is being made for military action. Yes?
So Corsairs wasn't just applying that to the Barbary Coast. Corsairs were just another term for pirates in general. And so that would apply to, I know there were British pirates, was it Hawkins or somebody, I don't know, but anyway, there were British pirates that were, all over as well. And I'm sure there were other nationalities. So Corsairs applied to anybody who was intercepting trade, whether it be Americans or otherwise.
Sometimes the terms get mixed up and used maybe inaccurately, but a Corsair originally referred to the type of ship. And so they, who's following us? Oh, they're pirates. Oh, they're in a Corsair. Who's following us? Corsairs. So they become, in this case, the Barbary Corsairs, or the Barbary Pirates, or whatever, whoever you want to call them. Part of it also, there's a level of political correctness there. Are they pirates or privateers? Well, they're privateers if they have the letters of marquis. If they're not, they're pirates. You don't just say, well, I don't know who they are, but they're corsairs, or it's a corsair following us. The idea is they don't mean you well.
Yeah.
If there's a ship that refuses to identify itself and there are armed men on it. Okay, thank you very much.